She always believed tragedies arrived like storms, loud, sudden, impossible to predict. But the truth about her brother's final night did not roar into her life. It slipped in quietly, carried by a voice she trusted more than anyone else's. A voice she had promised to love, honor, and build a future with. A voice that should have protected her, not shattered the ground under her feet. When she heard her husband whisper the words that changed everything, she felt her heart fold in on itself, as if God had paused the world just long enough for her to feel the weight of every lie she had ever forgiven. Long before that night, she remembered the softness of her brother's laughter echoing through the narrow hallways of the house they grew up in, a place where the wallpaper peeled but the faith never did. He had been her anchor, the one who carried buckets of hope into every dark corner of their lives. Losing him wasn't just losing family. It was losing the part of herself that believed the world still held mercy. She never imagined that the man she married, the man who once knelt beside her in the kitchen while she scrubbed floors, the man whose fortune stretched across coastlines, held the missing piece of the puzzle that had haunted her dreams for years. His charm had masked his shadows well. His generosity had kept questions at bay. His touch had lulled her into believing she was finally safe. But secrets have a way of dragging truth to the surface. And the night she opened that hidden drawer, the night she found the photo her brother took just hours before his tragedy, everything inside her rewrote itself, and love could no longer silence what truth demanded to be heard. Long before her wedding dress hung in the quiet bedroom of the mansion, before her name appeared beside his on marble plaques and charity invitations, she lived a life stitched together by shifts, prayers, and the scent of disinfectant from the houses she cleaned. She never imagined her path would cross with a man whose world looked nothing like hers, where silence was softened by classical music and wealth wasn't something to chase, but something inherited. She entered his estate as a maid, nothing more, wiping crystal surfaces that caught her reflection in fragments. He entered her heart slowly, in ways she didn't recognize until it was too late to stop. He wasn't supposed to notice her. Men like him never did. But he paused one morning as she polished the brass railing by the staircase, asking if she needed help reaching the top step. She laughed nervously, certain he was joking. He wasn't. His kindness felt out of place, almost suspicious, yet she accepted it because it had been years since someone looked at her without pity or impatience. The more he learned about her past, especially the brother she lost, the more attentive he became, as if carrying a secret sympathy he couldn't explain. Her co-workers warned her not to fall for illusions. Wealthy men lived behind walls built from old stories and older mistakes. But she brushed off their concerns, telling herself she wasn't naive, just hopeful. He attended church with her mother, donated anonymously to her community, and spoke to her with a softness she had only ever seen in movies. When he asked her to marry him, she didn't hesitate. She believed God had finally sent her a refuge. What she didn't know was that love can be sincere, even when built on a buried truth waiting for its chance to rise. She remembered the morning the shift in her world began, a Tuesday drenched in the pale glow of winter light when the mansion felt colder than usual. She arrived early, as always, the scent of lemon polish clinging to her uniform. Her duties were predictable: straighten the living room, dust the library, refresh the linen closets. But that day the air carried something unfamiliar, an uneasiness she didn't yet know how to name. She paused at the base of the grand staircase, sensing movement above. When she looked up, he was standing there, leaning against the railing as though he'd been waiting for her. He greeted her with a smile too warm for that hour of the morning. Millionaires rarely smiled at staff. They nodded, waved dismissively, or offered stiff half-sentences. But he, Nathaniel Ward, looked directly into her eyes, as if he wanted her to see something beneath his polished exterior. She returned the smile hesitantly, clutching her cleaning cloth a little tighter. Something about him felt larger than the room they stood in, as if the walls adjusted around his presence. "Your brother loved mornings too, didn't he?" he asked gently, surprising her. She had mentioned her brother only once, weeks earlier, during a casual conversation while arranging books. She froze. His tone carried an unexpected tenderness, and for a moment, she wondered whether God had sent someone who understood grief the way she did. She nodded, unable to speak, uncertain why her heart felt suddenly exposed. He stepped closer, his shoes echoing softly against the marble. "I've been meaning to tell you. I'm truly sorry for your loss." She whispered a thank you, wondering how a simple sentence could unravel emotions she worked so hard to conceal. Most people offered hollow condolences, spoken from distance. But there was weight in his voice, a sincerity that unsettled her. The rest of the morning passed with strange interruptions. He appeared in doorways as she cleaned, offering water, conversation, and questions that drifted into personal territory. She told herself it was harmless curiosity, yet each time he approached, her pulse quickened. She had never imagined a man of his status lingering near someone like her, someone whose life had been shaped by absence and responsibility instead of inheritance. During lunch, she found a small envelope on the edge of the kitchen counter, her name written in elegant ink. She looked around, confused. Inside was a folded note, thanking her for bringing warmth into an otherwise cold house. She read it twice, then tucked it into her pocket, unsure whether to feel flattered or frightened. Millionaires did not write notes to maids, not unless they wanted something. Her co-workers noticed the subtle change immediately. They exchanged knowing glances, whispering in the hallway. One of them, Rosa, pulled her aside before the end of the shift. "Men like him don't do kindness without reason," Rosa warned, gripping her arm gently. "Please be careful. Wealth creates storms you can't always see." She brushed it off, telling herself Rosa was simply projecting old fears. But as she caught a glimpse of Nathaniel watching from the balcony, a tremor of doubt slid through her. That night, at home, she told her mother nothing. She didn't want to confuse possibility with fantasy. Instead, she focused on the soft hum of the television and the scent of garlic frying in the pan. She prayed for peace, prayed to keep her heart guarded. Yet his face, those searching eyes, kept drifting through her thoughts. She hated the way hope could bloom without permission. Days passed, and his presence grew harder to ignore. He asked about her dreams, her mother's health, her faith, her fears. No one had asked her those questions in years. She felt seen, not as an employee, but as a woman. And though she tried to resist, her heart began leaning toward him in ways she couldn't control. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the man who stood before her with gentle words and a softened gaze carried a truth heavy enough to tear apart every memory she held sacred. A truth tied directly to the night her brother never came home. A truth that had been waiting patiently for its moment to surface. The first time she saw Nathaniel outside the mansion, it was by accident. She had finished her shift early and stopped by the small corner market near her neighborhood. The aisles were narrow, the shelves slightly crooked, the cash register older than she was. She was reaching for a carton of milk when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said, his tone lighter than the one he carried in his marble halls. She nearly dropped the milk. He didn't belong in that kind of place. Men like him shopped in stores with chandeliers and attendants in black suits. Yet there he was, dressed simply, blending into a world that wasn't his. She asked what he was doing in her part of town, her voice barely steady. He smiled without answering, moving past her to pick up a bag of coffee beans as if the universe hadn't just tilted. She watched him scan the shelf, noticing how the fluorescent lights cast a more human glow on him. He didn't look like the man whose family name sat on the side of skyscrapers. He looked reachable. She hated how comforting that felt. When they walked out together, the wind carried the scent of rain. He offered to walk her home, and despite every warning echoing in her head, she nodded. As they walked, he didn't ask questions. He didn't flirt. He simply listened. She talked about her brother again, about the night he left and never returned, about the unanswered questions that gnawed at her mother, about the silence that followed his tragedy like a stray shadow. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets. At her street corner, he stopped. "You deserved better than what life handed you," he murmured. His voice trembled slightly, as if he carried a burden he couldn't yet name. She felt drawn to that vulnerability, a side of him no one else seemed to see. She thanked him for the walk, though her heart raced with questions she wasn't brave enough to ask. When he turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of something in his eyes. Regret, maybe. Or memory. Something old. The next weeks became a quiet choreography neither of them acknowledged. He found reasons to be near her. She found reasons not to push him away. He invited her to sit with him during his breaks, always in the library, always at the table near the window where sunlight drew soft lines across the floor. She told him about the books her brother used to read to her, the ones with torn covers and hopeful endings. Nathaniel listened intently, as if every detail mattered. Yet even in those tender moments, there were shadows trailing him. Sometimes she'd catch him staring into nothing, his expression tight, haunted. Other times he'd change the subject abruptly, especially when the conversation drifted near her brother's last night. Once, when she mentioned a specific date, he flinched before forcing a smile. She noticed. She always noticed. But she convinced herself she was imagining it. Love, or the beginnings of it, can make silence appear harmless. Her mother noticed the shift next. She commented on the glow in her daughter's eyes, the way she hummed while folding laundry. "Just be careful, mina filha," her mother whispered one night. "Happiness from wealthy men often arrives wrapped in beautiful lies." She brushed the warning away, needing to believe, that Nathaniel was different. Soon, his gestures grew bolder. A bouquet left near her locker. A book she had once mentioned placed gently on her workstation. A handwritten note tucked beneath it. "Some stories deserve a second chance." Her hands trembled when she read it. No one had ever treated her with such deliberate tenderness. She felt her heart yielding in ways she had promised herself it never would again after losing her brother. But the mansion held more than polished floors and golden frames. It held rooms she never cleaned, doors she had never been assigned to open. And behind one of those doors, in an office she had only glimpsed from afar, lay documents, photographs, and fragments of a truth she wasn't yet meant to see. A truth Nathaniel prayed she would never uncover. Because the closer she moved toward him, the closer she unknowingly walked toward the night her brother's fate had been sealed. It happened on a Thursday, a morning so ordinary she didn't expect anything to shift. She was polishing the hallway mirrors when Nathaniel left the mansion in a rush, keys jingling in his hand, tension carved into his brow. He barely glanced her way, mumbling something about a meeting downtown. His footsteps echoed down the entryway, and then the heavy door clicked shut. The silence that followed felt unnatural, as if the house itself was holding its breath. She finished her usual tasks, dusting the banisters, refreshing vases, before heading toward the east wing, a part of the mansion rarely assigned to her. When she reached the long corridor leading to Nathaniel's private office, she hesitated. Staff weren't allowed there. The doors in that hallway were always locked, except for the day Rosa needed to retrieve a misplaced document. But as she walked past, she noticed the office door was cracked open. A thin line of light escaped through the space, slicing across the dark wooden floor. Her heart thudded. She told herself to walk away, to respect boundary. Yet something subtle, almost divine, urged her forward. Perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps intuition, or perhaps a whisper from the brother she still grieved. She pushed the door with trembling fingers, revealing a room colder than the rest of the mansion. The curtains were half drawn, letting in just enough light to reveal shelves filled with leather-bound books, framed certificates, and a large mahogany desk cluttered with papers. She stepped inside, drawn to the desk without knowing why. She wasn't looking for anything, at least not consciously, but the moment her eyes landed on a single photograph partially buried under a stack of documents, everything in her froze. It was a blurry image, taken from the corner of a street she recognized immediately, the very street where her brother had been last seen. She felt her lungs tighten. Her fingers shook as she lifted the photograph, examining the faint silhouette captured in the distance. And then the world quieted. Nathaniel. The image wasn't crystal clear, but the outline, the posture, the jacket. She knew it too well. She sank into the leather chair, the air thick around her. Why would her employer, her confidant, be present the night her brother disappeared? Why hadn't he ever mentioned being anywhere near that street? Her pulse hammered with disbelief and dread. She wanted to put the photo back and pretend she had never seen it. She wanted to believe coincidences still existed, but the truth had a way of anchoring itself. On the desk beside the photograph lay a file folder with the corner slightly bent. Against every instinct, she reached for it. Inside were legal documents, dated just days after her brother's tragedy. Reports, statements, details she had never been allowed to see. One line stood out: incident involving collateral damage during a private security intervention. Her breath stumbled. The company name on the document was stamped with the Ward family emblem. Nathaniel's family, his empire. A private security operation? On her brother's street? Why? She scanned the pages quickly, eyes stinging with tears. The words blurred, but the meaning clawed its way through. The operation had gone wrong. A mistake, a chase, a panic. Her brother had been there by accident. Wrong place, wrong time. And Nathaniel had been part of the team overseeing the intervention. Her hands flew to her mouth as a sob escaped, quiet but raw. She forced herself to read on, desperate for clarity. The final page contained a brief internal note. Lead operator advised to maintain silence, pending resolution. Signed with initials she recognized instantly. N.W. She dropped the folder as if it had burned her. The room spun, her heart fractured. The man she trusted, the man whose gentleness had softened her grief, had been tied to the night that stole her brother's life. Whether by mistake or intention, he had carried that truth into their every conversation, every shared moment, every whispered promise. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Panic surged through her. She wiped her tears, shoved the documents back into place, and slipped out the side door just as the main office door began to creak open. She made it around the corner in time to hear Nathaniel's voice inside the room. "Who was in here?" His tone was sharp, controlled, suspicious, and for the first time since she met him, she heard something in his voice that terrified her: fear. She spent the rest of the day moving like a shadow, silent and weightless, hoping no one would notice the tremor in her hands or the way her eyes kept drifting toward the east wing. Her heart pounded so hard, she feared it might echo through the marble corridor. Every time Nathaniel passed by, she felt her stomach twist. She avoided his gaze, but he noticed. He always noticed. His eyes lingered on her longer than usual, studying her closely, as if trying to read the secrets she carried beneath her ribs. Late in the afternoon, he approached her while she arranged fresh towels in the linen closet. "You okay?" he asked, voice steady but sharp beneath the calm. She swallowed hard. The photo, the file, the truth she wasn't ready to acknowledge, it all pressed against her ribs until breathing hurt. She forced a smile and nodded, but Nathaniel didn't buy it. He stepped closer, invading a space he had always respected before. "You've been quiet," he murmured. "Different. Did something happen while I was gone?" Her throat tightened. His proximity used to soften her. Now, it unsettled her. She shook her head, muttering something about being tired. He lifted a hand as if to touch her arm, but hesitated. His fingers hovered for a moment, trembling slightly, then retreated. She had never seen his composure crack. The small tremor in his hand told her everything she needed to know. He sensed she had found something. That night, she left the mansion early, claiming a headache. She walked home under a sky bruised with clouds, her steps uneven. Every memory of Nathaniel felt poisoned now. Every confession, every laugh, every gentle gesture. She couldn't reconcile the man she loved with the man whose initials marked the report that changed her brother's fate. She sat on the edge of her bed and wept into her hands, not just for her brother, but for the love she felt slipping through her fingers. Her mother knocked softly and entered without waiting. One look at her daughter's face, and her expression fell. "Tell me," she whispered, sitting beside her. She couldn't. Not yet. Not until she understood whether Nathaniel had acted with malice, or was trapped in a tragedy he never meant to cause. Her mother held her gently, humming an old hymn that once soothed them through long nights after her brother's disappearance. The melody brought no comfort this time, only the memory of a world before the truth became a knife. Days passed, and maintaining distance became impossible. Nathaniel grew more attentive, more protective, almost desperate in the way he hovered near her. She watched his every movement, searching for cracks in the version of him she thought she knew. One afternoon, she found him sitting alone in the library, his face buried in his hands. She paused in the doorway, uncertain whether to enter. Before she could decide, he looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, vulnerable. "Please," he said softly, "don't shut me out." Her breath caught. She wasn't ready to confront him, but she was even less ready to let him rewrite the story with half-truths. She stepped into the room, keeping distance between them. "Nathaniel," she whispered, Were you anywhere near my brother the night he—" Her voice broke before she could finish. He stood up too quickly, knocking a book from the table. His face drained of color. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. Panic flickered behind his eyes. "Why are you asking that?" he whispered, his voice cracking. She stared at him, unable to stop the tears gathering. "Because something doesn't make sense." He stepped closer, his breath unsteady. "There are things you don't understand. Things I tried to—" He stopped himself, jaw tightening. "I never wanted you to get hurt." The words felt like a confession wrapped in regret. A storm formed inside her. She wanted the truth, but she feared what hearing it would do to her heart. Could love survive the weight of such a revelation? Before she could speak again, he whispered the sentence she would replay for the rest of her life. "I was there." The world around her blurred, and the breath left her body. Not even faith had prepared her for those 3 words. Silence filled the room after his admission, thick, punishing, alive. She felt herself drifting backward, as if the floor had tilted beneath her feet. Nathaniel took a step toward her, but she raised a trembling hand, stopping him cold. Her heartbeat hammered against her ribs, each pulse echoing through her ears like a distant siren. She needed air, distance, answers. But most of all, she needed strength. Strength to stand, strength to breathe, strength not to collapse under the weight of a truth she had never imagined carrying. He reached for the back of the chair, gripping it until his knuckles turned pale. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he murmured. The softness in his voice twisted her stomach. How dare he speak gently when he was the source of the deepest wound she had ever known? Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall. "Not yet. Tell me everything," she whispered. "And don't lie. Not anymore." Nathaniel sank into the chair as if gravity suddenly doubled. He rubbed his palms against his face before finally speaking. "Your brother, that night, there was an operation, a private one. My family's security team was tracking someone who threatened one of our properties. I was there to supervise." He paused, swallowing hard. "Your brother wasn't involved. He wasn't the target. He was just walking home. Wrong place. Wrong moment." Her breath fractured. The words pierced her, but she forced herself to listen. "There was panic," Nathaniel continued. "Movement in the dark. A misread situation. The team reacted too fast. I tried to stop it, but it all happened in seconds." She pressed her hand over her mouth, a soft cry slipping through her fingers. "Why didn't you come forward?" she demanded, her voice cracking like broken glass. Nathaniel's eyes filled with something that looked like shame, and something deeper. "I wanted to," he whispered. "But my family, their lawyers, they ordered silence, said it would destroy everything. The company, our reputation, the team. They swore they'd handle it quietly." He looked at the floor. "And like a coward, I listened." She shook her head slowly, disbelief tightening every muscle in her body. "You listened while my family fell apart," she whispered. "While my mother prayed every night for answers that were locked in your office." Nathaniel's face contorted with guilt. "I did come forward," He insisted weakly. Not to the police, but to God. Every day. I begged for forgiveness, but I couldn't bring myself to speak to you. I was terrified. Terrified you'd see me for what I truly was. She felt a surge of anger, sharp and scorching. "And what is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "A man who hid behind wealth while my brother was buried without truth?" Nathaniel didn't defend himself. He just looked up at her, eyes wet, expression stripped of pride. "A man who failed, a man who should have done more, a man who fell in love with you long before he ever deserved to." The confession struck her unexpectedly. Not with tenderness, but with mourning. Love was supposed to be a refuge, but now it felt like another betrayal stitched into her skin. She backed away, needing space to breathe. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she whispered. "I don't know if I ever will." Nathaniel nodded slowly, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. "I'll accept whatever you decide," he murmured. "But let me at least give you what you deserved from the beginning, the truth." Before she could respond, he reached into the drawer beside him and handed her a sealed envelope. "This," he said quietly, "is the full report. The one my family hid. Names, timelines, the officer responsible, everything." She held the envelope with trembling fingers, feeling its weight, heavy, final, undeniable. Part of her wanted to throw it at him. Another part needed it like air. She turned toward the door, her vision blurred with tears. Nathaniel's voice followed her, fragile and breaking. "Whatever happens next, I will spend the rest of my life trying to make right what went wrong." She paused, just long enough for him to hope. Then she walked away. And for the first time since her brother's tragedy, the truth no longer lived in shadows. She walked home with the envelope pressed against her chest, the cold night air cutting through her thin jacket. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the pavement, but none felt as dark as the decision waiting inside that sealed report. When she reached her front door, her mother was waiting, wrapped in a shawl, eyes filled with a knowing sadness. Without a word, they sat at the kitchen table, the same table where her brother once laughed, prayed, and dreamed. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. The truth spilled out in dates, signatures, testimonies, and the undeniable timeline of a tragedy that should never have happened. She cried, not because the truth destroyed her, but because it finally allowed her to breathe. The days that followed unfolded slowly, like pages turning in a book she wasn't ready to finish. She met with investigators, provided the report, insisted her brother's name be restored to dignity. Nathaniel cooperated fully, offering every document, every detail, even when it meant exposing his family's empire to scrutiny. She watched him from a distance, quiet, humbled, stripped of the armor wealth once provided. He attended every hearing, never approaching her unless she allowed it. He prayed outside the courthouse steps, head bowed, lips trembling. She didn't know if she could forgive him, but she recognized the sincerity of a man choosing accountability over comfort. It didn't erase the past, but it honored the life her brother had lost. Months passed before she knocked on his door again, not to return to the mansion, but to speak truths of her own. She told him forgiveness was a journey, not a gift. That faith didn't erase wounds, but it taught her how to carry them without drowning. Nathaniel listened, tears tracing silent paths down his face. And when she finally reached for his hand, not in reconciliation, but in possibility, they both understood that love built on truth could endure what lies once tried to destroy. The past would never vanish, but together they stepped into a future shaped not by tragedy, but by the courage to face it.